Welcome to Faith on the Frontline. Faith on the Frontline is a podcast series focused on providing insight into the real life stories faced by everyday people and the ways in which their faith helped them to overcome the life hurdles that they faced. In this series, we'll be talking about a host of subjects. These will range from coping with debt and the rising cost of living crisis, parenting young people in particular, given societal pressures, through to having an open and honest conversation about mental health or even dealing with death and loss. This 6-part series will talk about real life personal experiences with real life women who will share how their faith helped them through the battles. Our mission here at Faith on the Front Line is to share some of the personal stories of how others have overcome real challenges that many people still face today. And by having these conversations, we hope that you too can find faith in your battles. My name is Ola Rugbu. I'm a mother, a businesswoman, a mentor, and I've been through many of my own battles, from facing my own mortality, having successfully gone through a treatment for cancer, through to going through a divorce and bringing up teenage children as a single parent. And I'm your host for Faith on the Front Line. In this final episode of our Faith on the Frontline series, we'll be talking about a subject that is becoming more prominent and more widespread as an issue: mental health. According to statistics, 1 in 4 people experience mental health issues each year in the UK, and over 792 million people are affected by mental health issues worldwide. Given the many pressures currently taking place, these figures show no signs of reducing. In this podcast, we'll be talking about mental health, dealing with trauma, and the practical steps that can be followed to protect mental health. I am pleased to have with us today Faye Gagel-Panchal. Faye is a mother of twins. She has been a Christian for over 30 years. She has a degree in fine art and postgraduate in community education. Faye has worked in a children's home on social work projects and community education. She's been a volunteer for Care Confidential in crisis pregnancy field, focused on counselling-style bereavement support for post-miscarriage, post-abortion and post-adoption. The first 2 years were in the community, and thereafter, 8 of those years were spent in Peterborough Women's Prison, providing bereavement support. Faye now works as a trauma counsellor for adults and children for her local church with a Cambridge-based charity, and has private clients through membership of the Association of Christian Counsellors. Welcome, Faye. And before we start, can you share a little bit more about who you are and what you do as a trauma counsellor?
I'm an what you call a standard therapeutic counsellor. I've simply done extra studies in trauma work. So that's post-traumatic stress disorder. And there's a variety of ways of dealing with trauma, which are slightly different from the sort of person-centered counselling that I normally do. Person-centered counselling is where a client comes into the room and literally the session is based entirely on what they bring that particular day. Trauma counselling can work with a lot more of neurological science, which is amazing because we know so much more about the brain now and how the brain can heal, and how we can use, let's say, a quiet, calm part of our brain, let's say the left side, to help the more stressed and disorganized part of our brain, which can often be the right side of the brain, to help it, one side to help the other. And therefore people feel far less out of control. They're simply, I'm a normal person who's dealing, actually sometimes often reacting quite normally to a very abnormal situation. And I think that kind of, the more knowledge we have about how trauma affects the brain and how it affects us as a whole being, the more we're able to help those in trauma.
Brilliant. Thank you, Faye. And that sounds like a really important support in terms of trauma support and very specialist. But before we go into that in a little bit more detail, I would like to just understand a little bit more about your faith journey. So can you talk us through how you came to faith? That you've been a Christian for over 30 years, but can you just share your faith journey with our listeners?
Okay, I'll be very brief because 30 years is a long time. I grew up with an understanding of the Bible and an acknowledgement with myself of the existence of God, but it was through actually a cult in America called the Worldwide Church of God that my parents were involved in, and I was involved in until I was 14. So I had an Old Testament idea of God. And I would have called myself Christian because I believed that Jesus was a historical figure. I believed he died for the sins of the world. I was part of the world, so therefore he died for me. So therefore that made me a Christian. But without the that personal step of going, Jesus, I choose to follow you, and the infilling of the Holy Spirit, I was unable to really live a Christian life. So I went off my own way for a good number of years. And then when I was 22 in art college, so I did come to sort of a point of absolute personal crisis and called out to God, going, why am I in this state? And literally he met with me. Jesus met with me one night in my bedroom, and he went, it's because you haven't followed me. And all of this happened in a kind of a nanosecond, but it seemed to go on forever. I was aware of the absolute purity of God at that moment, the perfection of God, and at the same moment, the realization that I could not exist. We cannot, as human beings, exist in the presence of perfection. And at that same moment, Jesus said, it's like flipped a coin. He went, yeah, that's why I died. That's it. As simple as that. I am perfect, but I died for you. And in that moment, I went, yeah, okay, I accept that literally. And what followed thereafter was him simply saying, writing everything I'd ever done, like on a blackboard, wiping them out and go, it's gone now, it's gone now. And then just the simple words, follow me. And that was it. And I experienced from then on complete peace, just total peace in the midst of absolute turmoil, emotional, psychological turmoil because of what was going on. And I just went, and I knew I belonged to him. And I've always known that I belong to him. I'm loved by him. I'm precious in his sight. And the ups and downs of life thereafter, because I had some friends who'd been involved in drug taking on quite a light basis, but I had this sense, this real calling that I actually wanted to work with unchurched people. So hence I eventually went and did a postgraduate studies in community education. I spent a couple of months with Teen Challenge in Germany, which was quite interesting, learning about sort of drug rehab from the Christian point of view, because they run a lot of these, it's the Cross and the Switchblade organization, and doing biblical studies and a bit of studies about how people actually worked in drug rehab on a Christian basis, and just the importance of faith in changing. But I did feel called to work in the secular area, so with education departments and social work for a very long time. I just knew that's where I should be. And actually, even in those times, because you're not allowed to share your faith or your politics, God actually gave me opportunities to share at moments that were completely God moments. And so I suppose, and then over a number of years, I again had thought, I don't think I really, and that kind of made me think, I never want to be a counsellor. Goodness me, you just have loads of people's problems. That's all you ever get. And then God led me to Care Confidential. And after a year with them, just in a local Peterborough office, I then worked for Care Confidential prisons, or voluntary, in Peterborough Women's Prison for 8 years, doing the voluntary post-abortion, post-miscarriage, and post-adoption work. And during that time, because the Holy Spirit just said, I want you to do this. Literally, I was in a church meeting, a service. A lovely lady called Janie Bingham was talking about how she had started volunteering in the prison. The Holy Spirit just said, I want to be there. Within me said, I want to be there. So I went, okay, I'm coming with you, literally. And that was an amazing, amazing place to be. We came as a Christian organization, but we didn't share our faith, but God was at work in such an amazing way. We'd have clients sitting down in front of us and just blurting out, I've started going to chapel, I've just started getting interested, and you know, so the opportunities were amazing, but we always kept within the parameters of what we were doing. But it was at that time I really thought, I really need to go and do some more counseling training. So I started my diploma and did 3 years of that, and then followed on by more trauma work. And because I've often had this thought of, in terms of trauma as well, again, I experienced incredible kind of restoration from God after a particular violent assault at work. And how his word just, I remember I was in the house and I felt I had to go and see the doctor because my jaw had been dislocated. And I had to walk out of the house in order to get on a bus, in order to go to the GP surgery, which was the other side of town. And I was so terrified. I just thought, I can't ever leave my house again, even though the person had been apprehended and was actually in prison. My fear was so intense. I can't do it. And my Bible reading that morning, I sat down and read my Bible, and it was, I'm paraphrasing, you see my getting up, my lying down, you see my leaving, you see but basically you see everything about me. You see when I leave, you see when I come home, you see my getting up, you see my lying down, you know everything about me. And I went, I can do this. And literally I said, because I had that word to say, you're coming with me through the door. I see you walking out the door. And I had a panic attack on the bus. It was horrible, but I did it. And it was on the strength of that word. And that made me sometime later, because this was many years before I wanted to do counseling work, I thought, isn't that interesting? I began to hear about many people who'd had similar things and never left their house. I thought, oh, that's interesting. I also went through earthquakes and various other things as a child, and I thought, what is it about some people? They can move past a trauma, but others get stuck. And I did friends had sons who were in the Gulf War, Afghan, all this kind of stuff. I began to hear anecdotally more and more how two people in the same situation, one has post-traumatic stress, which is normal but gets over it. The other one has post-traumatic stress disorder and is completely stuck in life. And I thought, whoa, this is amazing, because I've experienced it myself and I've been able to go through on the strength of God's word, but also because there's something incredible that obviously can happen, and change is possible. And so I did some further studies on that, and I am still I find it's an area of life that I just find is so important, about helping people move from being stuck, because everything can change. We are not cast in stone.
And that's a really good experience to share, Faye, because again, some people that will be listening here, they will not be Christians, but they may be at a point where they have experienced some kind of trauma and they are stuck. So I would be really interested to just unpack that a little bit more in terms of, what are some of the observations, where people, some of the traumas that you have observed. You also talked about your own personal crisis that took you to the point, to various points in terms of your growth and your development, but you leaned on God. But I would be really keen to understand, what are some of the traumas that you have observed, and what are the, some of the situations where people have been stuck? Maybe we can just talk about that a little bit more. And some of our listeners, by the way, may not be Christian, but they may be at this point in their life where they're experiencing difficulties right now.
Well, I've worked with children and I've worked with adults on an enormous. I mean, we go from historical sexual abuse down to simply, let's say, person A would not consider to be traumatic, and yet person B, because of the way they process thoughts and emotions, it's become a complete trauma and they're stuck. So I would say that's the first thing to talk about. Some of my experiences is that trauma is something that the brain builds as a protection. it increases, it simply keeps telling you, don't go there, don't go there, don't go there. So it builds quite unhelpfully lots and lots and lots of fear around it. The amygdala doesn't think very far, it just goes, whoa, that's it, that's a problem, don't go near that. And part of what it does is it buries things. Obviously, if something like historical sexual abuse or other forms of emotional abuse come out later on in life, where you've managed to, because human beings are incredible survivors, and you can survive and function quite well for a number of years, or not too well, and then all of a sudden crisis happens, and the traumas literally come up and going, right, now you pay attention to me. But unfortunately, over that time, fear has built its layers, so that that people get stuck in a sort of mindset. If I can give it an example, let's say with a child, there can simply be a moment in which they had a slight panic and something didn't happen. They got stuck somewhere, and another child would go, right, maybe it'll be okay, and I'll just do something else or whatever. Or they talk about it afterwards, or they manage to get some support, even just from mum and dad. Sometimes the child will not be able to speak about it, or they have not understood what's their own emotions about it, and they can then become completely traumatized over something that you'd look on and go, that's really quite simple. And so sometimes what you've got to be aware when thinking about trauma is that people experience life differently, and so it's quite difficult to give a cut and dried experience. For one child, it can be simply a sibling with autism having unexpectedly hit them when they weren't expecting it, and that can set off a whole series of reactions to the rest of the world outside. So that by the time you look at the surface, you go, well, that doesn't make sense. That wasn't really that bad, when X, Y, and Z are setting them off all the time, and they start to freak out. You go, actually, that's not too bad. But you work backwards, and it might just be something quite small like that. It might be things that people have said at a point when somebody is very, very vulnerable. Trauma is often built, they say that the brain, often if you were alone at the time of the trauma, and there was no support or no one to talk to, nobody to work through it with you, it can become stuck. So that could be anything from goodness me, I think about trauma, a situation with a paramedic, for instance, a child, say, sometimes living with a sibling with autism, for instance, sexual abuse, a parent being very uncaring and unloving, and isolating that person, because we've got emotional abuse as well as physical, and if the incident happens when somebody's vulnerable, often very young, or vulnerable for other reasons, maybe extremely tired, or at a low ebb, it can stick. And so the work of trauma, trauma is very we've all been traumatized in life for one reason or another, but it's often how we are able to process it that is the difference between the disorder and it stopping you in life, and actually being able to move on.
I wonder whether there are, whether you're noticing increased incidences of, you talked about childhood trauma, whether you've noted an increase in adult trauma, and in terms of their impact on mental health. So has that become worsened over the time? And are your observations in terms of the types of cases, are they different compared to maybe a few years ago? Or is it similar, but it's just more people are talking about it?
Well, it's interesting because most of the work I end up doing when people come with surface level issues, we always end up going back in life. I do a lot of long-term work with clients, sometimes over several years, and their initial anxieties, yes, everybody will be impacted by day-to-day life, but often I will say that often their reactions now are based on the fact that many things weren't processed, or they're coming into the present day with a great deal of anxiety that they've had for often from childhood. And I think when you've had this from childhood, you think, well, that's how life is. That's how I should think. That's how I should operate. And for various reasons. I mean, some people, and this is a mental hormone thing. Sometimes people are born with higher levels of anxiety than others. So I mean, let's just take a recent COVID. It's that to me is probably the best example of mental health, and how I saw a massive change happening in my clients' lives. Some people loved it. They loved the lockdown. They loved being quiet. They found that a lot of their anxieties just dissipated, because actually they weren't people who loved people. They found people life with one another, with each other, quite traumatic. They didn't like crowds. They didn't. So, but then coming out of it, they noticed that, they are no longer able to cope with certain situations which they would be able to cope with before lockdown. And that led to some really interesting conversations about what have you built up all of a sudden. What have you built up in your life over this period? And then you've had this respite, and it's been calm, and it's been lovely, and you've come back into trying to live with other people, and all of a sudden you just can't be interested to be. Some things just came erupting into the surface of lives, which were from years and years and years ago. Separation anxieties, massive separation anxieties. Other people finding that that they, let's say that their position in life, their work life, meant that they were under enormous stress. They let's say during COVID, but perhaps they had no personal fear of COVID, that didn't work. But the isolation of it really caused a great deal of distress. And so yes, people reacted so differently. Some people were, yes, I love this peace and solitude and quiet. Other people hugely distressed at being separated from one another. The other thing also, I suppose, is anxiety about the future. A great deal of that's always there. Maybe I can share a thought or two about, let's say, money, because often money is a huge factor in our life. This is now sort of more personal from myself, but it does pertain to how we can have a mindset for a very long time about something in particular. Let's take money now. As a child, because of the certain decisions my parents made, we went from being very comfortable financially to be very, very insecure financially. And my concept of finance, my concept of money was terror, because it'll always be taken away and there'll never be enough. And I was confronted by this just a few months ago at church. We're talking about, okay, gut feeling. What is your first reaction when somebody says money? And mine was absolute just terror, fear. And I realized that actually I'd still been carrying, a deep, like what I'd call a body memory of lack and fear of lack. And I work a lot with body memory, with trauma. We can remember many. It's often a very, very big clue. There's some wonderful work, books written by an author called Bessel van der Kolk, and also Babette Rothschild, about how our body does recur, because our mind and our body are completely one. They're not separate. How our body will remember, holds a memory of things. And I thought, and I do so much work on body memory with people. And I thought, gosh, this is as deep as a body memory, because it's gut level. This is every fiber of my being is responding very negatively in this way, despite the fact that I've seen God provide for me all my life. He has. There's been absolute no doubt about it. In fact, even during COVID, I was ill for a very long time, unable to work. Then I was unable to do, for instance, Zoom work with a lot of the people. My income just almost disappeared for many, many months, and I had more money in the bank than I ever had. And I had a verse from God, which was from the Israelites, who had a long 40 years in the desert before they reached the promised land. And it was one verse, and it says, and their shoes never wore out. And I thought, that is such an amazing, and that was the first thing God said to me, your shoes will never wear out. And my goodness me, the minute life starts going back to normal, you start earning more and working more, my bank balance just goes right back down again. So those amazing things happening. So despite that, I still had this gut level reaction to it. And I'm going, okay, this is not okay. And literally, I started praying about it, going, God, I don't like this. Don't want it. I want to be released, and I want to walk in abundant life. And just this thought, this word came, was like, if anybody is in Christ Jesus, if we've given our life, we are a new creation. And I thought, whoa, that works for body memory too. Yes. And I've just simply had to accept it and be in it and go, every single time I feel that coming up, going, actually, I am physically a new body, if that's what I've been told. And interestingly, working with some clients very long term, where we have done very necessary trauma work and very necessary body memory work, there came a point where I actually thought, we have got this wonderful, although it's very important for our mental health to process and to often use counseling if that's important, or reflection or journaling, or talking to a friend, talking to a loved one. All this is processing, and it's very, very important. There's also the other complete, like the two sides of the coin, is actually we are a new creation. Everything about us is new. And not only that, but from the moment of walking into of God's kingdom and saying yes to Jesus and going, I'm following you, we are being transformed. So we have that wonderful promise, and that has been quite fundamental to my faith, and in terms of mental health, and how I would approach something that's absolutely, that's one of the biggest fears, isn't it? Along with your health is your finances. So in terms of mental health and what we worry about, that was a real answer, and it's there.
Yeah, of course. And that is so powerful, Faye. And I wonder, so given this series we've touched on a number of subjects. You're right in terms of finance, and there are a lot of emotions attached to that. But we've also touched on bereavement, people who've lost loved ones, people who've gone through divorce, or even people who've had a threat to their lives. So how does, in terms of some of the things that you've talked about already, even around the body memory, and even before leaning on God, does that leaning on God and the body memory apply also to those people who are going through some of the challenges beyond money?
Yes, I do work with people who have no faith, and in fact, an awful lot of the schools work I've done over the years has been entirely that context, and all the work within the prison was in that context too. So I would say, the simple, it sounds simple, but it's the process of sitting with someone who respects you, who will listen and believe you, in terms of talking through your loss, makes an enormous difference. We are also the combined thing of actually writing about it makes a huge difference. I can go back into neurological studies, but they've shown that people who have both written and talked about a trauma or a bereavement have recovered better than those who simply talked. Simply because I think writing is a body action, and it helps the cognitive processes to go. And we used to do a lot of writing with women in the prison, and we used to find that when you just allow yourself to start to write, all of a sudden some quite deep subconscious thoughts and positions come out, and there's a lot of freedom in that. And that's what we found. So actually, I highly recommend talking and writing. Write about whatever you do, whatever you want to do with what you've written is up to you. Sometimes it's very useful. You can write what we've done, anger letters towards people, but you never post them, but you get it out, and then you decide almost as a choice, actually, what am I going to do with this? Am I going to release this? Because actually the anger is still poisoning me and is making my life terrible. My anger towards them isn't really helping me. I'm not getting any kind of sense of revenge from it. It's simply destroying me. And often we've had this thought of, okay, that, well, sometimes we tear it up, sometimes you flush it and lose, sometimes I put it in a compost bin. I've had to simply go through just the processes of trauma work, which is how to explain it. It's called recall and update, which is a method of going through trauma with and you're simply using the left brain to help the right brain. It's quite a specific way of training, so you can do that whether you have a faith or not, and I do a fair amount of that work. Rewind technique is also something that can be used, but really the best thing, we are people who live life verbally, we live life emotionally, and we've got words, and they are so important in shaping our world, and we can use that a lot. So I would recommend anybody who's even just thinking, oh, I can't go and speak to a counsellor yet, start writing. But do go and talk and write. Bereavement is something that we all go through. Loss is part of being alive, and I think probably that there's something a client once told me. She says that at the beginning it's like you're wading through mud. It's heavy and it's claggy, and you've got your wellies on up to your knees, or your waders up to your waist, because it's that deep, and you go step by step, foot by foot, and eventually the mud disappears and you're left with puddles on the path. And then sometimes the puddles will actually just be clear rainwater, and it'll reflect the sun and the sky. And sometimes you can decide to jump in that puddle and have a splash around, and it'll actually be fun. And it changes from being something overwhelming and heavy to being something, a memory that you dip into. And I thought that was an absolutely beautiful way of describing the process, because you have to go through it. There's never a quick fix. There's to bereavement, there isn't. Having somebody alongside you while you're going through it is the best thing that can happen. Literally, that's what counselling is somebody going alongside you while you experience what you are. And step by step, I've seen it happen over and over and over again. You know, the heavy mud becomes a smaller puddle.
That is a really, really powerful image. And I love that. So, you know, the mud then becomes a beautiful, clean puddle. Is, you know, it's very, very, you know, very strong visual image that a lot of people can relate to. So Faye, that is brilliant. Thank you. So you obviously have a very strong belief in God. But I wonder whether there was a point when you were going through some of the challenges that you have personally experienced, whether you had seen a dip in terms of that belief, and got to a point and it may not necessarily relate to you, but where you thought, why me, Lord? And, you know, did that place pressure on your faith in that belief?
Oh yeah, yes. I mean, I think basically, if you just get out of bed and walk out of your bedroom, you're going to face challenge. Put it that way. So whether it's family or friends or anything, there's been times, I would say, where I might find myself in a situation going, God, I'm here. I don't believe I'm in a difficult situation because of my own doing. I've searched, I've thought, and I thought, no, I'm pretty sure I'm not, and yet the situation is really difficult. And yeah, that's been very challenging, because prayer means that you don't necessarily, things don't change immediately. You know, sometimes prayers don't get answered, and you turn it around and go, okay, what can I do now? And there's been times been really, really, it's been really hard. Either faced with the death of somebody you've been praying for years and years, a situation which perhaps is causing you enormous pain and is not being answered. And I think for me, it's always been difficult. I faced with that, I've never been, oh, that's just, God is good, he loves me, that's fine. No, I've really struggled. And I found forgiveness is having to forgive, whether it's yourself or others, is paramount. Absolutely, you can't move forward unless you do that. And that's otherwise you get stuck. And just having to come back to God is good. And having to retrieve from your own memory and your own experience, just what have you done before for me? Right. Okay. You are you. You haven't changed. I'm just going to for a while stand on what you said and not what I feel. And just often just that being, just stopping thinking, stopping shouting at God, which is what you do, and go, okay, just what are you saying in this situation? Where are you here? And that changes the perspective, because so often, I mean, Jesus said, in this world you will have trouble. You will. That you can't avoid it. But I'm bigger than that. You know, I've overcome. I'm bigger than that. And it's finding, it's going back to being with him. Sometimes just being quiet and being silent. Going, okay, here I am. I've run out of words. I've run out of shouting. And sometimes it's a choice. I mean, often you'll think, well, I really, you know, you get to stage thinking, not talking to you today. I'm annoyed. Not doing this, you know, really not doing this today, God. And by then you think, yeah, actually, I know that doesn't work. I know. And you go, okay, I'm choosing to trust. I'm choosing to believe. I'm going to, and you work your way back into go, okay, it's a choice. It's a choice. It's actually always a choice. It's always, I think that's what I'd say to myself. It is always a choice where you position yourself. I can choose to be angry or at him for not answering a prayer, or I can choose to think, okay, let's just believe the impossible, that maybe you're here.
That's brilliant, and I really like that, and I take it on board, and I'm sure, you know, people listening to you will also appreciate that, in terms of the fact that it is a choice. But in terms of that initial, you know, that perhaps that angry, you know, point where you were perhaps angry with God, or maybe perhaps frustrated, and making that decision about the choice that you choose to follow him and believe in him and know that he's going to get you through that situation. Was that an instantaneous moment, or did that happen over time? So just really trying to understand, you know, from that initial feeling of, you know, frustration perhaps with God or with a situation that you found yourself in, to recognizing that actually it is a choice and I have a choice to lean on him. Did that happen straight away, or did that take time? And if it took time, how long did it take for you to get to that realization?
Okay, the answer is both. There's been one moment, and I realized that I was a worrier, and I was stressing about a situation. I'd worked as hard as I could for it, and I was really worried. And literally God just spoke, and he said, you've got a choice to worry or not. If you've done everything you can do, to worry is therefore a choice. And I went, oh, you're joking. Went, yep, that's true. It is a choice. And I went, okay, I'm going to choose not to. I'm going to choose to believe it's okay. And that has helped enormously. So that was literally him going, it's a choice. You know, the world does not come to an end if you stop worrying. It's a control thing. We think we've got to worry, we've got to fret always. So sometimes, okay, that's been an instantaneous one. Another time I'm deeply frustrated, let's say about a situation with a loved one. And God has literally said, right, be quiet now and listen. And he'll give me something that will be deeply helpful and help me understand it from a different perspective. So that's really helpful. He gives us a different perspective on something, and he changes our heart. And all of a sudden, we get a heart response to the situation where we think, oh, I can understand, I can see now. And literally, sometimes it's going around the issue and looking at it from the opposite side, because he can see all sides and we've not been able to. And that's been a really helpful thing. And the other thing is literally sometimes head down and plod through the days. Just keep going until there's either I become at peace with something, or the situation may change, or I just get a different perspective on it. So sometimes it's just, nope, got to just keep going through this day and the next day and the day after that. Keep calling on him, keep leaning on him, keep praising him. Keep
Mm,
recognizing that actually he has spoken. He a very important thing,
mm,
again, with choice, is what you say over yourself. And I'm just as guilty as the next person to saying rubbish over myself.
mm,
But he said he's given us abundant life. So actually, when we don't ask for it, we speak it over our life. We just declare, I declared abundant life over myself today. And sometimes that can completely shift things
mm.
totally. In fact, I've known it has. Yeah. So so much of it is a mindset. Faith is not a feeling. It's a choice. Everything about, I think everything about your faith life comes down to a choice, because he gives us choice. He gives us free choice. He gives us free choice to follow him or not follow him, free choice to forgive or not forgive, free choice to decide to have faith or not.
So we've just gone through COVID, and it's been a really intense time for many people. But I'd be really interested to understand how people are or have reacted to fear during that time, and what has been the impact on them, and also wider. I'd be really interested to hear your experiences of how people have reacted to fear through COVID or as a result of COVID.
Well, speaking from the Christian point of view, there was an incident which really impacted me when working with a client, and how they described that that they had a very stressful job. They were at the forefront of many of the responses to the effects of COVID, and they were this person was a Christian, and they were able to say that it was incredibly well, it felt so strange and so almost countercultural, the fact that they had peace during that time. They were not frightened, they weren't worried. They were affected like everyone else with the day-to-day challenges of lockdowns and all sorts of that, but they had this incredible sense of, I don't need to be afraid. And they attributed that entirely to the presence of God in their life. And they said it felt so strange, because around them, everybody said, oh, you must be frightened, you must be terrified, you must be this, you must be that. And they're going, actually, I'm not. I'm
Mm,
okay. And
mm,
that was very interesting to hear.
mm,
My own personal experience during that time, where I became quite anxious really for some family members, and it was a situation that was completely out of my control, could do nothing about it.
mm,
I could do nothing to help them. The situation was such that they weren't really going to perhaps help themselves, and I got very stressed. And I remember I was walking up the stairs, and literally God just stopped and went, right, it's okay. He says, you need to trust me in this, and
mm,
trust me as though COVID didn't exist,
mm,
as though it doesn't even exist. And I thought, that is just bonkers, really, really, but I just decided, okay, I'm just going to give it to you, and I'm going to make that choice
mm,
to not worry, although everything in me said, yes, this is something that's really serious that you should be worried about. I thought, right,
mm,
okay, I've got a choice here. And it felt very strange again to do that, because I thought, am I abdicating responsibility completely for this? And
mm,
it felt very weird, but I thought, right, I'm going to sit with this thought for a moment and see if it's reality. And sure enough, I would say that it's been proven true, that
mm,
the very things that I was absolutely worried sick about happening didn't
mm.
happen.
Yeah, cool.
And again, I can only attribute that to just that profound word of God, that word from him, which says, actually, I'm in control of this. Doesn't matter all this fear that you've got surrounded by this. Actually, I'm in control of it. And let's say it feels very countercultural. It feels almost like you're abdicating responsibility. But literally, I would have obviously in the situation done my utmost to alleviate whatever the situation, should it have happened as I feared, but it
Mm,
didn't. But
mm,
I had that incredible reassurance. And I said, felt very almost countercultural, but it was completely real.
Yeah, and I think that's a really, really strong point, Faye, because I even take it, even in terms of what you've said, even outside of COVID. So there are people that are going through, some really quite strong diagnosis. So if I relate back to my own personal situation, having gone through cancer, and that's a really frightening time for just me, also other people going through something similar. But what kept me going was that belief in God, that God was there, he was taking me through it. And just having that gave me peace. Going back to what you were saying through COVID, the fact that there was so much uncertainty. So for a lot of people, that would have been very, very overwhelming, which would have had an impact on their mental health.
Yeah. And if we go back to thinking about what we're talking about, body memory, it literally, that sense of peace is a body experience that you experience. It's not just in your head.
And I wonder, Faye, whether, for those people that believe in God, they have that belief, they have that sense of peace. But what about for those people who don't have that belief in God and don't have that faith? What are the specific things that we can share with them, or that you would like to share with them, to get them through perhaps some of the difficulties that they are experiencing?
Yeah. And I think if you don't have a faith, you still have got a considerable amount of, there's a lot of power in choice. And sometimes it's that choice to, instead of going down a very negative, self-destructive route of maybe just picking up a phone to a crisis helpline, just going, I'm going to reach out. Some of my work is with very, very, very depressed people, and I've seen the immense courage that they have to decide, I'm going to pick up the phone. And it takes courage. It takes courage to live. It takes more courage to live than it does to not. I think seeking help is one of the bravest and most courageous things you can do. And medication is sometimes part of that. And to not feel that you're a failure because you've, needed to, because sometimes it can be a lifesaver, but yes, it takes courage. And definitely, as I said, I've seen people with immense courage make decisions to go down, because there's perhaps been somebody there, not just myself, but other people there going, you're worth it. And that's still the main story.
How important is it to, or did you lean on any other people? So you you obviously leaned on God, but did you do that by yourself? So I guess how important is having a community around you, and what does that look like?
Yeah, well, I'm blessed from the word go with a Christian mum, and I think I would say categorically that for me, my personal experience of my mum was that I knew what unconditional love was because of my mum. So that I was very blessed, and I'm incredibly blessed by having two siblings that I can call on at any point. I've got a wonderful church group who I know, and we do WhatsApp. We can ask for prayer for one another all the time. And I have close personal friends who are Christians, who we, that have walked life with the good and the bad, those kind of friends that can come, who can step into your house, whatever state it's in, and you're both okay. And I think you need those friends, all the time, the friends that you can be completely open and honest with. And that's a wonderful thing that you do have as a Christian, is fellow Christians, and there won't be that many, but there'll be some that you can completely trust. And none of us are perfect, so sometimes we let each other down, but for the main part, we can trust each other. So yeah, there's no way you could ever do this on your own, not ever.
That is a really important message. So for those who are listening, it's not about just trying to do everything by yourself. It's leaning on God, and also leaning on the people around you. Life is tough enough as it is, so why do this by yourself when you've got lots of people to support?
I've also got plenty of friends who are not Christians, who've been absolutely wonderful, that I love and respect, and so whether you've got faith or not, having relationships where you can just trust one another and you can be there for one another are and the relationships are not based on our levels of perfection. They're based on our ability to love and accept ourselves, so that we can love and accept others. That's our, and we're all flawed, but to realize that actually the greatest gift we can give one another is our time and our presence, our being there. The best kind of parent is a parent who's alongside their child, not the parent who throws a fortune at that child. So it's the same with friendships.
No, that is brilliant, Faye. Thank you. So what advice would you like to share with our listeners? And bear in mind that some of our listeners will be Christians and others would not. So what advice would you like to share with them?
Number one, you're actually not alone. If somebody is struggling mentally or emotionally, pick up the phone, reach out, because you are valued more than you realize. You're worth it. You are worth it. And I think that's a basic truth.
Absolutely. No, that's brilliant. So you're not alone. Pick up the phone.
Or reach out, speak. Yeah.
And what about for those people who don't have somebody that they could reach out to, and they're going through a tough time? Where else can they get support?
You can self-refer for counselling through the NHS, and you have 6 weeks of free counselling. You might have to wait a little bit. There are charities such as the Samaritans, which will be there at the end of the phone, and just pick up a phone.
Absolutely, and that's a really powerful way to end our talk today. You are worth it. Don't go through this by yourself. There are so many people that care for you. Make the choice, pick up the phone, or make the choice to get help. And we've also provided some resources for you that you can access, so you know where to go to if you are going through a difficult time right now. Thank you so much, and thank you for listening to us here on Faith on the Frontline. Thank you to Faye Gagel-Panchal. The soundtrack is by Jemi Nwadike. It's called Our God is Good. You can find her music on Spotify, YouTube, and other digital channels. If you are experiencing a crisis with your mental health or would like to access resources on any of the themes discussed during this podcast series, go to our website, which is www.faithotfl.com. That's www.faithotfl.com. This is the last episode of our Faith on the Frontline series. Thank you for listening, and I would like to take the opportunity to thank all of our supporters and contributors. We look forward to you joining us for Series 2, where we will share more of the Faith on the Frontline journeys. Thank you for being part of this important journey. Thank you once again. Thank you for listening, and goodbye.